Hey, what's up, guys? Today we are going to touch upon a very important topic of our application, which is the user module. So far, we have seen quizzes, we have seen their questions, their options, and all those kinds of very important aspects of the application of quiz. But we haven't seen how the user will interact, how the user will register, or how the user will log in. And that is a very key part of the application, right? So we will start with the user module. However, before I dive in, there's one thing which I would like to bring to your attention. In our last video, what we did was the TypeORM was configured using environment variables, right? We were using the config service to get the environment variables and then send it to TypeORM. However, I made one small mistake, which is inside my app module, I have not imported the config module. Okay. And that is very important. We need to do that. So I'll do it right now. Config module for root, and you should pass is global as true. And then if I save, everything is running. I mean, this is how it should be. So now if I do npm run start dev like so, it does boot up, right? And it is you know connecting to the database as well. So everything is fine, and this was the only change which I wanted to show you before we start our application. So now let's create our user module. As you know, Nest comes with a CLI option, and we will be using that CLI option to generate a module. So G is for generate, and then MO is the short form for module. So we will do module slash user. Once I run this command, it does two things. It creates a new module. Okay, it created this file called user.module.ts inside the user folder, which is correct. And it made some changes to the app module file as well. So let's see what was the change in the app module. As you can see, it added user module, which is nice. It has the intelligence to understand that we created a module, so obviously we will be loading it, and so it automatically imported it. Okay, so the user module is created, but obviously a module is nothing without the entity. So I will go inside the modules user folder, and I'll create user entity.ts. Now every entity is equivalent to the database table. So export class user extends base entity. This is how we define the entity class. It needs a decorator, which is the entity decorator. And inside the decorator, we need to pass some options. What are those? Now, because we are using TypeScript, what you can do is go inside the decorator. We see that it is exporting a declared function entity, and it expects entity options. So let's go inside that as well. In here, we see the properties which are allowed for us to add. Name, which is obviously something which we want to add, but I can see it also has order by, which means, what does it say? It says specifies the default order by used for queries from this table when no explicit order by is specified. Now, what I understand from this is, let's say I am loading users from the database. By default, they will be ordered by the ID. But tomorrow, if I want, say that, whenever I'm loading the users, they should be ordered alphabetically by their email address. I can do that. Okay. Obviously, there were quite a few things. We are not going to touch them right now. We are right now creating our entity. So let's stay focused. Now, this is the base entity, and I'll create certain columns so that the database has all those things in place. So I have ID, which is primary generated column. Then I have these columns. If they have no options in the decorator, they will create a varchar field. So name, email, password, Then we have these two, created at and updated at. Only change I want to do is email unique should be true. This database level check I would like to ideally have. Okay, this is done. So now we have the module, we have the entity, we need to create a controller and a service. So every service is again export class user service. It's a normal TypeScript class. The only difference of a service from an entity is that it has the injectable decorator over here. Okay, that's it. That's our user service. However, you need to understand that because we are using this service inside our module, in the user module, not PHP, sorry, old habits, inside the providers array, we should say we are using this service. Okay, so the next thing that we would do, the last thing in this video, is create the controller and the URL. So far we have the module, the service, the entity, and the last thing is obviously, as we said, controller.ts. The controller is again a class which has a decorator control. Okay, it will be prefixed with user, and in here we will handle a post URL slash register. This is the function which will handle that request. Okay, and because this is a controller, we will need the service to be injected over here. So constructor private, the user service is injected like this inside the controller, right? And let's just say our user service has a function like so. So what we are primarily going to do is, when the request is coming over here, we will pass that to this user service dot do user registration. Okay, the request will be passed over here, and whatever we will get from the service will be returned back. Okay, so this is our main structure of the code. This is what is going to happen. So user comes to this URL, this controller will be used, and this method will be called. This method internally injects the service is called over here, and the do registration method will be called. So now to handle the request for create user, we need to do the validation using a DTO. Hence what I am trying to do now is create a DTO inside the DTO folder, and let's name it user register.req, which stands for request DTO.ts. So we can create request DTOs and response DTOs. Right now we are looking at a request DTO, right? So export class. So we have user register request DTO. In that we will have 4 fields like so. Now we have name, email, password, and confirm password. Now all of them are required. So the first annotation for validation rule is not empty. Okay, now I need one additional validation for email, so I add this annotation is email. Okay, and then for the password we need 2 rules. One is that we should check the length. So basically both password and confirm password should be at least, let's just say not 6 but rather 8 characters long minimum, and it should be to a maximum 24 characters. And also I want to have a regular expression for the password which confirms that I have at least 1 capital letter, or rather uppercase character, 1 lowercase character, 1 number, and 1 special character. For regular expressions we have matches, where I can paste this regular expression and it will look for a string which matches this regular expression, right? So let me go to Postman. Okay, by the way, I just realized that my registration URL is not registered here, and I think it is happening because the user module doesn't have the entry of the controller which we have right now. So our module needs to have the definition of all the controllers which are there so that the routes are being registered. Now, if you see, it has this /user/register. If we look at the older one, I didn't had that. Okay. Anyways, so this is done. Now our request will be available. So why don't I do that? This is my request. I have already created the Postman collect request. So send, and it gives me a 201 created. Why? Because the body has name, email, password, and the confirm password. Now, if we are doing things correctly, this should fail, but it didn't. Why? Obviously, because we haven't handled it. User.controller. In here, we only have the request, but we are not doing anything to that. We are not processing it. So the first thing which I want to do is have the body annotation and do validation pipe. Give this the type which is user registration DTO. Now immediately what will happen is if I go to my Postman and request send, it gives me a 400 error saying password doesn't match. Obviously, because this is not satisfying the regular expression. Okay. However, I can see certain problems. One is it gives me a 400 bad request. Ideally, coming from a Laravel background, I feel it should be 422. So there's one way to do that. I'll show you. Okay. I do this new validation pipe, and in this I have the option to select error HTTP code, which is HTTP status dot unprocessable entity. Unprocessable entity is 422. So the prettier is working, and now if I hit send, request says 422, which is fine. However, this is way too big. Okay. And also I have one more problem, which is the regular expression is being duplicated. So in such cases, what you can do is, let's just say we create app.utils.ts, one file, and in there, first thing which I'm going to do is take this regular expression, do password rule equals this, export constant regex. I'll have certain regex rules, so password rule will be one of them. So immediately in here, I can do regex.password rule, and I can copy this. Oops, not this. Sorry. In here, what happened? I copied this. Matches should come over here, and now we are not repeating the rule, and things are looking better. And I can confirm that my rule is working. But now, can you see this message? This is horrible, right? I mean, I really can't show this to the end user. So what can we do? In a rule, we have the ability to send a message like password should have one uppercase, lowercase letter along with a number and special character, something like that. But obviously I don't want these things to be spreaded across the code base. So take this string, go to the utils, and again we'll have something similar, and export messages, password rule message like this. Okay. And I can simplify things, and again we duplicate here. Now what else? So this is done. We have put it in a file. I mean, you can also have different files for your regex and messages. I mean, it's completely up to you, but I feel right now we have very few, so one file will do. If things are getting heavy, I'll move them. Okay. Now one last thing which I want to refactor here is this validation thing, right? The newing up the validation pipe, it feels too bulky inside this controller. I can move this to, let's just say, constant validation pipe equals this. Let me import the stuff, status. Okay, so I am saying that this constant is this instance. Okay, and what will then happen is I can export constant settings equals validation pipe. Now, which means I can get rid of this entire block and do settings dot validation pipe. And now if I go to postman, send that request, it gives me this message. No, my request is still working as it should. However, my code is quite simple. My request DTO has the rule which is coming from a util file. It has the message which is also coming from a util file, and everything is separated out and I don't need to repeat them. Right. So far we have validated. Now let me just show you that if everything is correct, we will get this user request. Okay. So I'll come to postman, right, @123. We have an empty response. Why? Because we are getting the console over here. Okay. So far, so good. So now that we are getting the request object inside our controller, it's time to send it to the service and work through the rest of the things. So let's just send the request as user register. Now it will complain that no arguments are required. Why? Because the method inside our service doesn't expect that, but we need to do that. So user register DTO, we are saying that this method inside our service is expecting a user register object which is of type this. Okay, and then things become quite simple. Basically now we have a validated user register object and we can use the values to create a new user. So constant user equals new user, that's our entity. User dot name will be user register dot name, user dot email, and then I save the user. But now because save function, if I hover over it, you'll see this is a promise. This promise returns a user, which means I need to have an await. Because I have an await, oops, I need to make this function async. Okay, this is returning a user, so in terms of type hinting, I can then say that it's a it returns, this function returns a promise, and inside the promise it returns a user object. And because this service function returns a user object inside the controller, that you can see it's a promise, so I need an await. Because this is an await, I should have async over here, and I can also say that this function itself also returns a promise with a user object. Okay, so this is some TypeScript related thing which we should ideally do, so that the code becomes more readable and it helps you with all kinds of hints. Okay, now let's see what happens if we send a request. Okay, it sends ID 2 and everything is here, and because I have ID created at updated at, this means if I go to pgadmin, run a query, I can see that the user is created. Okay, however, I just have one problem in here, which is my password is in clear text, and that is definitely something which is not acceptable. So let's see how we can hash our password using Bcrypt. So to hash a password using Bcrypt, the first thing which we will have to do is obviously install two packages. One is Bcrypt and its type definition. So as you can see, I'm doing npm install Bcrypt and its type definitions as well. So @types Bcrypt. Now, while this is installing, what do we basically need to do? Bcrypt will allow us to send a string and it will hash it, right? That's the basic goal. And if I look at the documentation of Bcrypt, so this is the Bcrypt library or the node module which we are going to use. And if I go down somewhere here, the hash requires the plain text and the salt. So we will use something similar in terms of our implementation. So inside the service, what I can do is, let's just say we do constant salt equals await. Why can't I do Bcrypt? Has installed it, right? Bcrypt. That's a bit weird. Let me reload the window. Right, and try again. Okay, this is not coming up. Let me do one thing. I'll do Bcrypt, CRYPT Bcrypt, and try import star as Bcrypt from Bcrypt. Okay, for some reason it's not importing, but not a big deal. Salt Bcrypt dot. So the first thing which I would like to do is generate the salt. So this is the function I'm looking at, and once we have the salt, what we can do is say constant password equals again await Bcrypt dot hash. Now the first parameter over here is user register dot password, and the second parameter is the salt string. So we pass the salt over here, and this is our hashed value which can basically get replaced over here. So let's go to Postman. I already have one with reach me, so I'll do +1, send this request, and we can see that we have something cryptic over here, and this means our hash function is working. Okay, this means that inside our database now we won't have anything in clear text. Obviously the first record will continue to be there, but the second one has a cryptic password, so which is an improvement, right? We have been able to hash our password using Bcrypt. However, as you can understand now, this means I'll have to do it everywhere where the user object is created. Yeah, we can say that this is the function which will be used to from the user service to create a new user, but what I want you to show is something called hooks, which are available with TypeORM, where I can use this in a very elegant way so that this code doesn't need to be repeated. So let's see. I'll go to user entity, and over here I'll use before insert hook. Okay, and before insert hook is an async function where I can say set password. Okay, set is the prefix, and the password is the field name, and that's how things work. Password string. Okay, and in this basically what I'm trying to do is use this. Okay, and this will be not user register dot password, but rather the password string, and if it is not there, then this dot password. Okay, now this is duplicate, so hash is this Bcrypt. I'll again copy this, import, because for some reason it's not importing properly, but Yeah, no need to worry, this is done. And obviously over here I don't need the salt anymore. I'll simply have user register dot password, because what am I saying? I'm saying that when it is being saved through the entity, at that point, before insert, this thing will be triggered. Okay, and I don't need to do constant hash, I can simply do this password equals. Okay, so let's see, if I am lucky, I'll be creating a new user, Amitav Roy 2, and it does have a Bcrypt password. Looks like we have that in our database as well. Correct. So we have actually successfully made our user service not depend on Bcrypt, but the entire logic is inside our model, or rather the entity. And what we are saying is, anytime when this password is being set by this entity, this little logic should be executed, and this is where we are hashing the plain text password into a hashed password. Okay, so this is how we use Bcrypt to hash things, and this is how before insert is used to save that into the database.